네, 저희 첫 번째 순서 버나드 케인과 함께하는 미국 주식 시간입니다. 구글에 쳐도 나오지 않던 미국 주식 정보들 이 시간에 알차게 전해드리고 있는데요. 먼저 그동안 소개해드렸던 종목들 베스트 톱5 살펴보고 오시죠. 네, 버니의 미국 주식 베스트 톱5입니다. 첫 번째로는 TTD가 여전히 부동의 2위 자리를 유지해주고 있습니다. 어제는 뉴욕 증시가 일제히 하락했기 때문에 전반적으로 종목에서 좀 하락세가 연출됐는데 TTD도 어제 1.6% 하락하면서 어제 종가 기준 92.5달러를 기록했습니다. 자, 두 번째 종목 빌닷컴이고요. 이 종목도 마찬가지로 1%대 하락이 좀 나타났습니다. 방송일 종가 기준 199달러였고 어제는 250달러 선에서 마감했습니다. 세 번째 종목 스노우플레이크입니다. 성장성이 굉장히 강했던 그런 종목이고 어제 급락이 연출됐습니다. 4.67% 하락하는 모습 나타나면서 상승률 18%로 밀려나는 모습입니다. 자, 네 번째 종목은 마이크로소프트. 많은 분들이 좀 갖고 계시거나 알고 계시는 종목이죠. 상승률은 현재까지 13% 기록하고 있는데 어제를 소폭 하락하면서 어제 종가 기준 339달러 기록하고 있습니다. 마지막 종목은 넷플릭스입니다. 많은 분들께서 이용하시고 애용하시는 그런 기업이고 또 종목인데 어제 마찬가지로 1%대 하락이 나타나면서 604달러 선에서 마감했습니다. 네, 베스트 톱5 수익률 종목들 살펴보고 돌아왔습니다. 자, 오늘 바로 버니 씨 만나보겠습니다. 오늘 여쭤볼 종목은 보잉인데요. 이 세계 2위 항공기 제조업체죠. 보잉의 주가는 참 다사다난하고 또 등락을 많이 반복을 했는데 내년 1분기에는 흑자 전환이 예상된다고 합니다. 그래서 앞으로 주가 성장이 또 다시 살아날 수 있을 것 같은데 보잉이 어제는 3.7% 하락했습니다. 아무래도 리오프닝 관련주들, 항공주들이 전체적으로 조정을 받았기 때문에 보잉도 3%대 밀려난 게 아닌가 싶은데 최근에는 737 맥스, 이 보잉의 주력 항공기죠. 이 737 맥스가 운항객의 승인을 다른 국가들에서 좀 받아내면서 호재가 다시 들어오고 있는 것 같거든요. 보잉에 대해서 좀 살펴주시죠.
Boeing's a great company, but I want to start out by apologizing that this may appear too negative. Maybe this could be a reason to think that a cheap stock has all the negative news already built into it. Boeing can't seem to get out of its own way with major technical miscues across the enterprise. And like Lockheed Martin has already done, Boeing may have to cut personnel. It's difficult to do this at a time when the company has so many other issues. Issues uncovered during the flight testing and slow development of software patches could cause another delay to the 777X delivery schedule. Boeing has halted 787 deliveries several times over the past years as it's identified a slew of manufacturing flaws. Boeing suffered its latest setback earlier this month as it was forced to scrap another planned test flight for its Starliner crew capsule. So what I think about this space program is that when we think about the space program, in 2016, NASA gave Boeing and Elon Musk's SpaceX program $7 billion. And what they wanted them to do is to build a product that could be able to transport astronauts to these space stations. Well, Boeing got 2/3 of that money, got $4.5 billion. SpaceX got only $2.5 billion. But SpaceX has been very successful in terms of its launches. Boeing's yet to launch any space travel at all and no test flights. So I think that we have to think about who's been doing the right thing here and which company has had the problems. Well, Boeing's had the problems, and on top of that, this is just the space problems that are also on top of the fact that they've got the problems with the 737 MAX, the 777X, and the 787. Last November, the FAA finally lifted the grounding order for the 737 MAX after 20 months. That allowed the aerospace giant to resume deliveries of its top-selling model before year-end. Boeing I'm sure hoped that that marked the end of the unfortunate but isolated episode. New problems, though, have continued to crop up in 2021, further eroding management's credibility. Until Boeing improves its execution, I think we have to probably be careful about where our long-term prospects are for the company.
네, 보잉 회사가 자차 이 항공기의 기술적인 결함으로 인해서 어떤 경영난을 좀 겪고 있는지 짚어주셨는데 이렇게 단점들을 또 파악할 수 있게끔 좋은 정보를 주신 것 같습니다. 지금 최근에는 또 오미크론이 다시 확산하면서 항공주가 부진한 모습을 나타내고 있는데 보잉도 이와 관련해서 좀 안 좋은 그런 성장성을 좀 겪고 있습니다. 그래서 오늘 보잉에 대해서 좀 많은 이야기를 해주실 것 같은데 일단 오늘 보잉을 들고 와 주신 만큼 또 장점도 있겠죠. 장점도 한번 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
Well, we think about things, okay? Let's identify that there's two ways that people to identify valuations in the markets when they look at a stock. They can either look at a growth valuation or a valuation basis. Over the last 30 years in the markets, we've had a growth valuation stock market. And I believe the best driver of a company's stock performance in this space has been revenue growth, then earnings growth, then price to earnings valuation, and then free cash flow. Those are the four traits that I think are significant, and they go in that space. Revenue growth, earnings growth, PE valuation, and free cash flow. Of those four traits, Boeing's best drivers are going from the bottom up instead of the top down. They have more free cash flow. They have a cheaper stock valuation. Then their earnings growth has been poor. They lost money last year. And they've had uninspired revenue growth. In fact, if we think about revenue growth just in the last 4 years, 2018 relative to 2017, 8% revenue growth. 2019 versus 2018, and that's before COVID, 25% negative revenue growth. That was a little bit part of the 737 MAX. 2020 relative to 2019, 24% negative revenue growth. 2021, we only have 3 quarters done so far. So let's look at the 12 months from September 30th back to September 30th of 2020, 3% revenue growth. Thinking about revenue growth, think of this. While the 737 MAX deliveries have now resumed, Boeing's wide-body aircrafts have emerged as a new weak spot. Production of the 747 jumbo jet will end this year. And Boeing has slashed output of its next target model now, the 777, to just 2 per month. Most of those are freighters, as demand for the passenger planes has virtually disappeared. The 777X was supposed to revive demand for large passenger jets. But while the first deliveries was originally scheduled for 2020, it's been delayed till late 2023. Earlier this year, they made that decision. Even hitting that target may be impossible. The FAA has recently slowed the certification process as Boeing has not fully addressed the problems uncovered in earlier test flights last December. And nearly 8 years after launching the 777X program, Boeing has just 8 confirmed customers for that type of plane. The 787 has experienced a series of production problems. Boeing has periodically identified new manufacturing flaws over the past year, forcing it to halt deliveries again and again. It's just delivered 2 787s in the first quarter of this year after starting to get back on track in April. It has had to halt deliveries again in May. It slashed 787 production as it tries to get a handle on its quality control problems. The 767 has been the steadiest performer of Boeing's wide-body models in 2021. However, new emissions rules are going to likely force Boeing to stop building the 767 by 2028. And all of this, and we've already talked about the space program and how Boeing is behind SpaceX. Okay, what keeps Boeing going is that it's supposed to be one of the great aircraft builders in the world. And if we think about what's gone on since COVID, okay, Boeing's got 377 finished aircraft on its properties that they have not delivered because people have slowed down acceptance of deliveries because flights have been down. So if we think about it, what's going to happen to that drawdown of inventories? Boeing says they're going to draw that down to hopefully having 200 aircraft undelivered but built by the end of 2022. I don't necessarily think that that's going to happen. I think that's a big ask. This just reminds me of General Electric, a great company for so long that just had a lot of difficulties across the board. That stock price eventually reflected that, going from $80 to $5.
네, 보잉이 지금 또 여러 가지 문제를 겪고 있는 것 같습니다. 그렇다면 앞으로는 항공 사업과 관련해서 주력인 항공기를 제조하는 그런 사업 말고도 다른 신사업에도 주력할 수 있는 포인트가 있을까요?
Well, it's the short answer here. I'm going to say probably not. Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon, all the other big guys are already in competition, and SpaceX is way ahead of everybody right now. The only thing that benefits Boeing, and the reason why Boeing's still alive in that NASA project that was started in 2016, is NASA never wants to rely on just one vendor. So they're going to keep Boeing alive until something happens, because they don't want to be beholden or reliant on one vendor who can all of a sudden change the game plan for them, or then NASA is stuck with problems relative to that one vendor.
네, 신사업에 주력할 일은 좀 가능성이 적다라고 짚어주셨고, 보잉의 차트를 본다면 올해 하반기에 급등락이 굉장히 심했습니다. 특히 11월부터 12월 사이에는 낙폭이 굉장히 확대가 됐었는데 회복을 하는 듯 하다가 다시 오미크론이 나타나면서 급락하는 모습이 나타났는데요. 차트적인 분석도 도와주시죠.
Well, if we look at this chart right here, this is a four-year chart of Boeing. And what we can see is the stock performed okay going into 2018. Then it flatlined a little bit, and then COVID hit, and the market got taken down pretty hard in Boeing stock because people realized that not only weren't people going to fly, but the airlines were going to need a ton of capital infused into their business because their losses were going to be so big that they were going to have to postpone their orders of new aircraft. And since then, we've kind of bounced a little bit, but we've never come back to the original prices that we were at pre-COVID. When we look at Boeing's 5-year window relative to the stock market, and we can see right here the NASDAQ in the blue line, the Boeing in the black line. Boeing outperformed going into 2019, the end of 2018, and then it is basically flatlined or gone down, and the stock market has gone up pretty significantly post-COVID. If I compare, and what I'm always trying to do is identify stocks that are going to outperform the market. And I do that by looking at Boeing, and I divide it by the NASDAQ index, in this case the QQQs. The bottom portion of this clip is Boeing stock divided by the QQQs. The top portion of this clip is actually the Boeing stock. And we can see that during that period where Boeing outperformed the NASDAQ, that stock did great. And that was all of its gains, really, relatively speaking. Since then, we've had a pretty significant price decline, and now Boeing has picked up a little bit. It in early 2021 had started to outperform the NASDAQ, but now as the NASDAQ has gone higher and Boeing stock is not, it's underperforming again. Finally, let's look at Boeing relative to one of its competitors. Let's look at Boeing compared to Lockheed Martin. Okay, during that period where Boeing outperformed the NASDAQ index going into late 2018, it also outperformed its competition. But since then, Boeing's underperformed its competition all the way into October of 2020. Then Boeing started to outperform its competition again, and now the two of them are basically flatlining each other. A great stock not only outperforms the stock market, but it outperforms its competition. And in this case, the times that it outperformed Lockheed Martin were in the past. We have to see that the only way that I think Boeing can outperform again is because the stock is so cheap. And once they work through many of their problems, the stock can start to outperform. But I don't necessarily believe the revenue growth is going to be substantial to have Boeing be one of the great performers in the market.
네, 코로나19의 영향이 정말 컸던 것 같습니다. 항상 강조해 주시는 나스닥을 능가하는가라고 봤을 때 나스닥을 능가하긴 했지만 최근에 타격이 좀 강해지면서 주가 성장률이 부진한 건 어쩔 수 없는 것 같습니다. 그렇다면 현재는 그렇다 치고 향후 5년 동안 이 보잉 주가 전망도 한번 짚어주시죠.
Maybe, and the only reason, as I said before, is that the stock gets a bump because Boeing gets on track, starts to make deliveries, starts to work off its undelivered inventory of planes. But what I think is if you want to buy Boeing stock, you want to tell yourself this stock can see revenue growth year over year, not just 1 year, but year over year in excess, significantly in excess of 10%. It hasn't done that over time. It's a big asset business, and it's hard to be able to increase revenues year in, year out greater than 10%.
네, 오늘의 종목은 보잉이었습니다. 현재 많은 주가 부진을 겪고 있는 회사이지만 앞으로 향후 5년 동안 지켜보면 좋을 종목인 것 같은데요. 버니와 함께하는 미국 주식이라고 문자 샵 0082번으로 전송해 주시면 실시간으로 이런 이야기들 나눠보실 수가 있겠고요. 또 서울경제TV 채널 들어오시면 이야기들 다시 한번 시청하실 수 있습니다.